Hello again everyone, and welcome to my next video. I will start off today with the question, do you know from where in the Torah our sages learn about the sin of shaming someone in public? If you guessed from Tamar, you would be correct. The way it happened was, Yehuda promised to keep his last son Shelah from Tamar, who by Torah law was supposed to perform Yibum on her. But instead of that, he just kept her waiting around as a chained woman. Now Tamar could have easily rationalized that she had the absolute right to embarrass Yehuda in public for being an abuser, but instead, this righteous woman raised herself up to a very high standard and refrained from doing so. And now, she's forever remembered as the woman who taught us the principle of, it is better to throw yourself into a fiery oven than embarrass someone in public. However, in the very strange times that we live in, we have been led to believe that quite the opposite is true, that in fact it is a mitzvah to wake up in the middle of the night and toss another Jew into a hot blue jet of fiery shame. Now we are told that this despicable behavior is warranted due to the fact that we are in the midst of a massive Aguna crisis. But what I will endeavor to show you today is that the purported crisis is actually a man-made one. You see, there are rabbis who are pretending to help Agunot receive a get, but in reality they are causing them serious harm. What I mean by that is, the gets being obtained in this way have serious problems of legitimacy, because unbeknownst to certain unlearned people, the gittin that are being achieved through coercion, such as those that have come out in the past few weeks, are being procured through the efforts of simple street thugs who have gone on record to state the obvious, that they do not know anything about the laws involved. Some of them have also gone on record to say that they don't have to listen to the rabbis or laws which don't comport to their wants and desires, and they will therefore take the law into their own hands. But ironically, these same bullies have made it very easy for others to identify and render those gittin as counterfeit by way of their own extensive recorded conversations. In halacha, it makes no difference how boorish or cruel the man is regarded by society at large, because that has no bearing on whether or not a get is kosher. What really matters is the circumstances of the get, whether or not it was procured through kosher means, which is the only things that determines the get's validity. In the past few weeks, we have seen rabbis parading themselves all over social media and associating themselves with this mob as if they just did the biggest mitzvah in freeing a chained woman. But instead, these rabbis have created a big chil Hashem in supporting violators of the Torah, namely the women who have litigated in civil courts, and the social media bullies who have assisted these rabbis in the violation of the laws of divorce through the utilization of coercive measures, which is against halacha. They have also shamed men in public, about which Chazal say, Eino chelek l'olam haba, that they have no share in the afterlife. Many men on their lists have not even had a serve against them or been ordered by a bezin to give a get, but that does not stop the simpletons from pursuing their agenda. The so-called Aguna crisis is in reality a manufactured one, and it is being used to promote one of many feminist agendas. That is because most of the women today who have Aguna activists fighting for their get simply do not meet the criteria of a traditional Aguna, definition of which I have explained many times, including in my previous video, my response to the get refusal social media mob. Most of these phony Agunas litigate their divorces in court, which is such a grave sin that the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat chapter 26 states that such a person deserves to be excommunicated and they should receive no relief from a bezin after the fact. So I ask you, if this halacha is undisputed, such as eating pork is undisputed, then why are so many women violating the laws, and why are so many batei din, or rabbis such as Avi Kahan, enabling them and looking the other way? Stay tuned, and I shall answer this question as the video unfolds. We have a sad situation nowadays where both women and men hate the rabbis. Women because they feel that the rabbis should change the Jewish divorce laws and make the Torah more women-friendly. Whereas for the men, they believe that the rabbis have abandoned the traditions of yesteryear and are allowing the women to violate the laws of divorce without any repercussions. Therefore, the man, after being stripped of all of his halachic rights to his children, property, and assets, is left with nothing but the get as leverage to obtain his fair share. The women, of course, will tell you that a get cannot be used as leverage and that it must be given immediately. And yet, it is these same women who hypocritically make use of their own tool of leverage against the man, and that is the civil courts. Here now is a short primer into several of the halachas involved with divorce. Number 1. We have already discussed the universally accepted halacha which forbids a Jew from litigating his divorce in civil court. Anyone doing so is to be excommunicated as per the Shulchan Aruch, and is not afforded any help or assistance in a bezdin setting. He or she is rendered a rasha, and those assisting them are culpable for the same sin. Number 2. I have already mentioned in previous videos that most poskim have ruled that today we do not force a man to give a get, and when sanctions are called for, which is only in a small minority of cases, they consist only of hachokas de Rabbeinu Tam. See the documents below that illustrate from Rishonim and Achronim that it means sanctions that are free of any direct pressure, and it means no excommunicating, shaming, or any other direct compulsory actions. What it does mean, however, is that we remove ourselves from this person in such a way that he cannot borrow money from us, which is known as menias toiva. The Beis Yosef and the Maharik clearly state the word li parade, meaning we are to only separate ourselves from him, and not that we actively push him away. In fact, the Beis Yosef and others say that menias toiva is not considered coercion, since the man has an option to move to another town where he could get a loan if he so wishes. It is for this reason that many poskim say that today we cannot even employ menias toiva, since the social media defamatory remarks travel with him to his next destination. This is in contrast to the false belief that we can pressure a man by using social media mobs to embarrass, harass, and intimidate a man to giving a get. And don't give me any song and dance about an irrelevant book from 1500 years ago that nobody can read. If I can learn to read them, so can you. That is the problem with the modern style rabbis. They might throw out a name of this or that rabbi or sefer to prove their point, but they never quote anything chapter and verse like the authentic rabbis do. So to repeat, the hachokas de Rabbeinu Tam can only be employed where a person is obligated to divorce. In many cases today, and especially when women violate the Torah by going to court, you cannot coerce again, and therefore even menias tova is not allowed. Number 3, physically beating a man is not only a violation of American law and a crime, but also not allowed today in halacha. A man who employed these devices was arrested in 2013 after operating a gang of thugs for 30 years, and his name was Mendel Epstein, the Prod Father. But more about him later. Now, I'll bet you didn't know that beating and shaming and kicking a man out of shul or any other direct coercive measures are all equal in the eyes of halacha. Did you know that? That is the kind of information that you need the Meir Kin channel for. Because shaming a man via rallies or on the internet or on social media are all one and the same. It is simply not allowed, period. End of story. This is not my opinion, but the opinion of great Torah giants that lived hundreds, yes, hundreds of years ago that understood halacha better than the rabbis of today. And don't tell me that Avi Kahan or another rabbi from this or that community said it's okay. You see, the difference between Judaism and secularism is that the latter believes that being progressive is the way to go, while authentic Judaism recognizes that it is the rabbis and sages of the past generations who are to be revered, not the modern rabbis who want to reform halacha to agree with modern society's every wayward trend. In addition to this, most poskim are of the opinion that even in remote cases where coercion is allowed, If a man is voluntarily willing to give a get with a condition, such as I want custody of my son, which is his right, then you can no longer apply coercion. These laws are quite complex, and the ramifications for misjudging or rendering corrupt rulings have serious consequences for the woman, her future husband, and offspring. In fact, those children will never forgive their parents for starting them off in life on the wrong foot. It is therefore that Chazal stated that whoever is not knowledgeable in these laws should not involve himself in them due to the grave sins involved with rendering faulty judgments. We are obligated to expose the corrupt rabbis who are harming Klal Yisrael and giving women counterfeit gittin as a result of get coercion, which is against halacha. A get written under coercive condition is not worth even wrapping kibi balls in it. It is no different than if you wanted to get a Harvard University law degree but weren't smart enough to get into Harvard Law School, so instead of that you hired a counterfeiter to make you a fake Harvard diploma. It can say Harvard University on it, it can even have the gold seal on it, but the people who you are trying to impress will ultimately find out that it is counterfeit. The rabbis of today not only ignore these Torah violations, but actively support them. So it is these rabbis that have created the Aguna crisis, in that A, they are giving women faulty gittin and causing them to sin by remarrying under a false pretense that they are divorced. B, their future offspring will forever be tainted and rendered a mamzer. C, even those women who cannot bear children are committing a grave sin each time they engage in marital relations with their new husband. D, they are committing a grave chilul Hashem by desecrating the Torah laws and their wanton disregard for halacha. Is it any wonder, then, that the men who are pushed to the corner by the rabbis who support women violators of the Torah are left with no choice but to withhold a get as their last resort to obtain what is halachically theirs? It is the masses who call the men abusers who are in fact the real abusers, because they cover up the real abuse that the women commit by forcibly canceling the husband's rights to his children and property, and by committing parental alienation, which abuses both the husband and the children, all by using the long arm of the civil court in disregard to halacha. So I am saying to you that there is no Aguna crisis at all. If women would be held liable for their halachic infractions, and the rabbis would render only honest judgments and practice good faith in applying Jewish divorce laws accurately, there would be no need for get refusal. There is no perfect scenario to achieve 0% get refusal, but I can assure you that after interviewing many men undergoing divorce, they have told me that the main culprits here are the corrupt rabbis who are supporting women violators and at the same time stripping the man of all his halachic rights. The rabbis of 20 to 30 years ago warned us, in letters linked below, that this trend of corrupt rabbis was coming our way. They stated specifically that any rabbi assisting a violator of halacha, whether by supporting someone who is litigating in civil court or by seductively amending the halachas to fit societal trends, should be exposed as a heretic. Therefore, I will endeavor to expose for you 3 such rabbis who have openly violated halacha by promoting get meusa until this very day, and you could find all the evidence of this in the description box below. The first one is Shlomo Weissman from the RCA and Bezdin of America. As head of the Bezdin, he has the responsibility of procuring kosher gittin, but instead has disgraced his position by doing the exact opposite. Remember the proud father, Mendel Epstein? Well, the Reform Orthodox Rabbi Shlomo Weissman and the entire RCA had a close relationship with Epstein, secretly supporting his actions right up until his incarceration. Then suddenly, the RCA put out a bulletin that they do not support violence in pursuit of a get. In fact, in a recorded open forum conversation with the Instagram bullies, Weissman declared that Mendel Epstein's gittin are all invalid. Moshe Tender from Yeshiva University also declared the gittin as invalid. This all begs the following questions. Number 1. Why have they all changed their position on Mendel's Gittin only after he was caught? Number 2. Why has the RCA and the Beis Din of America not started a campaign to help those poor women to receive new and kosher Gittin after having been duped by Mendel Epstein, who gave them counterfeit ones? After all, those women paid a whopping $70,000 to $100,000 for his services, so surely they were seeking a kosher get. Why doesn't Shlomo Weissman have sympathy for these women, since surely in his eyes they are still considered agunot? Number 3. Weissman has openly supported abusive rallies where they're being sponsored by Ora, the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot, or the Instagram mob. So therefore, Weissman has contradicted himself, since shaming a person by way of a rally is equivalent in halacha to physical beating, and they are both forbidden. Yet he invalidated Mendel Epstein's Gittin, but not the other ones procured through public shaming. But that is not the only perversion of halacha that he did. You see, Weissman intruded into a divorce case that another Beis Din already has issued a ruling in, and not just any old Beis Din, but a zablah. A zablah, for those of you who don't know, is just about the best Beis Din anyone can get if they are concerned about any bias occurring. In a zablah, the man picks his arbitrator, the woman picks her arbitrator, and then both arbitrators choose a third one. This is exactly what happened in the Joey Michon case, where the zablah ruled on January 1, 2007, that he should not give a get, since he would be unkosher due to his wife Rosalind's involvement with the civil court. Michon is the same person who has recently endured non-stop shaming on Instagram, followed by rallies at his and his mother's home. And to top it all off, vile thugs showed up at 3 o'clock in the morning at Kennedy's airport to meet him at the baggage claim in order to harass and shame him. And why did they do all of this? Because the infantile mob was given tacit support by Weissman, even though he was well aware that Michon was following the zablah decision. Weissman felt that he can overrule another Beis Din's decisions based on his own corrupt way of thinking. To this end, he has recently issued Michon a letter stating that the latter will be receiving a siruv soon if he doesn't comply with Weissman's Beis Din of America ruling. This is in spite of the fact that today, since we don't have a Sanhedrin, which was a kind of rabbinic Supreme Court, no Beis Din has the right to interfere with or overrule another Beis Din's decisions. But Shlomo Weissman doesn't care about halacha. You can see all of Joey Michon's supporting documents below. Next in line, we have Avram Union from the Rabbinical Council of California, or RCC. In a previous video of mine titled Lana, Luna, and the Lunatics of the RCC, which I will link for you at the end of this video, you will see that Avram Union, who heads the RCC, has also contradicted himself in halacha exactly the way Weissman did, with the same double standard. In that video, I point out that in the divorce between Chagai and Luna Batsri, he attacks Luna for using the civil courts and blames her for violating the Torah. But yet in my divorce with Lana, he supported her through that same Torah violation. So go and ask Union if he read the Shulchan Aruch chapter 26. This is an undisputed halacha. So how could he suddenly become confused and rule with Chagai against Luna, but rule with Lana against me? Unless there are other corrupt angles at play here. And last but not least, we have Aryeh Ralbag from the Agudas HaRabbanim of Brooklyn and the Hebrew National Kosher Approval Stamp. Ralbag, who happens to be Lana's cousin, surely must know, as any secular judge would know, that a cousin can't act as a judge, but instead must recuse themselves from the case. But even that simple rule did not stop Ralbag's corruption, in that he went ahead and issued a fake seruv against me, even though the chief dayan from his very own Beis Din, Rabbi Ginsburg, issued me a letter in advance saying that I was compliant in halacha and Lana was not. Remember that gag order that Lana placed on me so that I cannot reveal any facts about her nefarious activities to any bezin? Well, Rabbi Ginsburg thought that Rabbak had stretched his corruption a little bit too far by allowing a woman to muzzle her husband from speaking freely and took action to save an innocent victim. To this I say to Rav Ginsburg, Zichron Levracha, thank you for standing up to the truth. This Rabbag, who has given Lana a green light to litigate against me in civil court, contradicts himself in a letter below where he chastises a Mrs. Sokol for using the civil courts against her husband. Let me quote for you what he wrote to Mrs. Sokol. This is to certify that we sent 3 summonses to Mrs. Julie Sokol Bergman to appear before our Bezin rabbinical court upon the request of her husband Robert Sokol. We also informed her that according to Jewish law, it is prohibited to bring a dispute to the civil courts and demanded that she immediately withdraw the dispute with her husband from the civil courts and present it to a Bezin to rule according to Jewish law. Unfortunately, she refused to withdraw from the civil court and is continuing in court. If in the future Julie Sokol will summon her husband Robert to appear before a Bezdin on this issue, Robert Sokol will not be obligated to go to Bezdin with her. And there you have it. So what do you expect from a rabbinic gangster? And Ralbag also worked hand in hand with Mendel Epstein for many years, until he was arrested. Ralbag barely saved himself from the long arm of the law by turning state's witness, mafia style, to save his own soul. We call people like Aryeh Ralbag a moiser, the same as Solomon Dweck. For those of you who don't remember, Dweck was a former real estate investor and convicted felon from Deal, New Jersey, who became an FBI informant against community rabbis, which is another way of saying a moiser. In the same vein, Ralbag, who was buddies with Epstein for years, suddenly stabbed him in the back by testifying against him. The Torah and halacha say many things about what becomes of a moiser, but I will share with you one of those things, which is that anything he does is not to be relied upon, and a Jewish moiser is equal to a Gentile. So if he's a moiser, do you see anyone invalidating his gittin? You don't, because the rabbinic gangsters protect each other. So what I have given you here is a mere sample of the massive rabbinic corruption that we are experiencing in today's world, especially in matters of gittin. And these 3 rabbis especially have engaged in hypocrisy, double standards, and blatant perversion of halacha. It is only a question of money or political affiliations that determines the outcomes of their rabbinic rulings. And lately we have Avi Kahan, as well as others, who are known to quote Rav ELYASHIV, allowing coercion when a couple lives apart, but they curiously never cite his TESHUVA. Well, as always, I have linked for you below his exact TESHUVA, where in fact he states just the opposite, that not only can you not force a man, but also you cannot even tell him that he needs to give a get. Now, do you see what I mean by rabbis twisting the halacha and lying about it? And by no means are these the only rabbis who corrupt the halachas of gittin, for there are dozens and dozens of them operating all over the world. I ask you to see the letter below, signed by many rabbis, obligating us to expose these wicked rabbis who are raining destruction down upon the Jewish people. Earlier, I asked the question of why most of the rabbis of today are ignoring plainly stated halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. Well, the answer is that the rabbis today are acting just as Chazal predicted they would act in the end of days. Our sages in the Gemara said that in the times of Mashiach, the leaders will be like dogs, in the sense that in the same way that a dog always walks out in front, but in reality is being led by his owner from behind, toward which direction the dog always looks to receive his guidance, so too the rabbinic leaders of the final generation look back to the laypersons who pay their salaries when they are deciding how to rule. So our leaders, instead of leading us in the Torah path of true halacha, have led us astray. I often quote the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, page 139a, that states that Hashem brings tragedies to the world on the account of corrupt rabbis. Now, wouldn't we imagine that the things that would anger Hashem most are the grave sins such as idol worship, immorality, and murder? Why does Hashem bring worldwide tragedies such as COVID-19 on account of rabbinic corruption, the rabbis being a mere minority of the population? The answer is that in Pirkei Avos, the Mishnah states that the world can only endure with din, emes, and shalom, which means judgment, truth, and peace. So when the rabbis act deceptively in matters of divorce, they violate the very core of the foundation of the world, as their rulings produce corrupted judgment, which causes them to obscure the truth, which ultimately disturbs the peace. What we see happening today is not a new phenomenon, such as if the men have suddenly become more cruel than they were before, but rather it is the rabbis who have manipulated the divorce proceedings, which keeps the litigants in the lucrative Bezdin system, pinning the woman against the man and the man against the woman, with constant strife between them, which keeps their cash registers full at the expense of a drawn-out divorce. Shalom bayis, or reconciliation, does not even exist in their dictionary, nor in their Torah, because when a rabbi counsels couples for reconciliation purposes, he cannot charge money for his time, because it doesn't appear noble to take money for making peace, since Aaron HaKohen, the peacemaker, also didn't charge. So instead of making peace as Hashem likes, the rabbis encourage discord between the couple, which allows for better job security for themselves. So how do we fix this broken system? Stay tuned for my upcoming videos where I will try to offer a possible solution to this crisis. In the meantime, my message to the corrupt rabbis is that your schemes, lies, and double standards have been exposed, since the documents below speak for themselves. And my message to those that support women violators is to do your own due diligence in finding out the real facts, in the same manner that you seem to be very good at doxing get refusers, employment, and family connections. For example, asking Aura if their systems are kosher is the same with them as asking Hebrew National if their products are kosher. Of course they will say it is. You need to go outside of them to find out the truth. If you act recklessly, your actions promote needless strife, procures counterfeit gittin, and amasses great sins for the baseless shaming of innocent men in the Jewish community. The halacha is very clear about shaming a man to obtain a get. Those that choose to ignore these halachas are playing with fire. Let me reiterate what I said in the beginning about the righteous Tamar in the Torah story, who taught us how careful we need to be not to shame someone in public, even though the story involves an Aguna. As always, thank you for watching, and see you all in my next video.